Have you ever mistaken obsession for love? That rush when they text you, the panic when they don't, the sleepless nights, the knot in your stomach, the fear that if they leave, you'll collapse. They told you it was love, but what if it's not? What if what you feel isn't affection, but anxiety? What if your longing isn't devotion, but dependency? What if your pain isn't heartbreak, but withdrawal? Because you weren't taught how to love without fear. You were taught how to attach. You learned to crave validation, to need someone else to feel whole, to believe your worth depended on their attention. Carl Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But what if you're not transforming? You're disappearing? What if your version of love is simply a fear of being abandoned, dressed up in romance? This isn't your fault, but it is your responsibility. To understand what you're truly feeling, we must start at the root, where love ends and emotional addiction begins." That knot in your stomach, the trembling in your hands when they don't reply, the obsessive checking. Last seen it, suivant to, they're typing, then nothing. Let me say it clearly. That's not love. That's anxiety. It's dependency. And it's been romanticized for far too long. What you're calling love is often just your nervous system outsourcing its job. Instead of learning how to calm your own storms, you've handed that responsibility to someone else, a person whose presence, words, and validation temporarily soothe the panic inside you. Psychologists call this emotional regulation, outsourcing, and it's one of the most common, most misunderstood forms of modern attachment. We live in a world of digital dopamine loops. A single message can lift your mood. A single silence can ruin your day. And the worst part? You don't see it happening. Because no one told you this isn't love. They told you it's normal to obsess. They told you if it hurts, it's real. They told you that craving someone meant you cared. But the truth is darker. What you crave is not their presence. It's relief from your own internal chaos. Carl Jung warned us, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. So you chase relationships, not to love, but to distract, not to connect, but to escape, because without them, you feel like nothing. That's not connection. That's survival. And survival love isn't love at all. It's a dependency system wrapped in emotional theater. When they reply, you feel relief, not joy. It's not dopamine for connection. It's dopamine for relief from cortisol. And the cruel trick, you start believing this cycle is proof of passion. But love, true love, isn't chaotic. It's steady. It's spacious. It doesn't hijack your nervous system. It anchors it. That's the difference. Attachment is about needing someone to stay regulated. Love is about sharing your already regulated self with another. Let me ask you, if that person disappeared tomorrow, would you feel grounded? Or would you collapse? If their presence is the only thing keeping you from falling apart, that's not love. That's nervous system outsourcing dressed as romance. And emotional dependency is not romantic. It's a trauma loop. We don't talk about this enough, because facing it means admitting something terrifying. I've never learned to hold myself together, so I look for someone else to do it for me. And it's not your fault. Most of us were never taught how to self-regulate, how to soothe ourselves, how to sit with discomfort without reaching for someone or something to fix it. But here's the truth. As long as your center is external, you will always live in fear. Fear of loss, fear of silence, fear of being abandoned. And that fear will make you betray yourself. You'll compromise. You'll shrink. You'll settle, just to keep them close, just to keep the pain quiet. But that's not love. That's your trauma, dressing up survival as romance. You don't need someone to rescue you. You need to come home to yourself. Real love doesn't come to rescue you. It arrives when you've rescued yourself and want someone to witness it. It's not about needing someone to complete you. It's about choosing to share from a place of wholeness. But addiction doesn't just distort how you feel. It rewires who you become in the relationship. Because when your nervous system is addicted to another person, you don't just lose peace. You start losing you. You mold yourself into someone else's image. Because deep down, you fear not being chosen. So you adapt. You soften your truths. You laugh when something isn't funny. You nod when you disagree. You stay, even when your soul whispers, run. Why? Because in your mind, being abandoned equals annihilation. Neurologically, this makes sense. The human brain interprets social rejection the same way it interprets physical pain. To your nervous system, being left can feel like death. Why? Because for most of our evolutionary history, being alone meant being unsafe. So your brain fights to preserve connection, even when the cost is self-betrayal. But what's truly heartbreaking is that most of this doesn't happen consciously. You don't say, "I'll abandon my needs to keep this person." You simply begin to disappear. Little by little, your preferences fade. Your voice softens. Your authenticity gets filtered through the lens of, will they still love me if I say this? And just like that, you become a curated version of yourself, an emotional costume stitched together by fear of rejection. Carl Jung called this process projection. We take what we lack, what feels broken, unlovable, or empty, and project it onto the other. We turn them into a mirror, a distorted one, hoping that their reflection will fix what we refuse to face. But no reflection, no matter how flattering, can heal what we avoid inside ourselves. Here's the paradox. The more dependent you are on being seen by another, the more invisible you become to yourself. And in that invisibility, you begin to contort your entire identity around their approval. You anticipate their moods. You shapeshift to stay desirable. You become less you and more what you think they need you to be. That's not love. That's emotional codependency. It's the slow erosion of your selfhood in exchange for temporary closeness. And what's even more painful? Many times, they didn't even ask you to change. You did it preemptively, as a survival strategy, coded into your psyche long ago. And this is where emotional dependency becomes dangerous. Because the more you rely on someone to stabilize your inner world, the less capable you become of doing it yourself. Your emotional baseline becomes them. Their silence becomes your panic. Their affection becomes your oxygen. Their withdrawal becomes your unraveling. You don't just miss them. When they're gone, you cease to function. That's not heartbreak. That's a loss of identity, because the person you were only existed in relation to them. And when they leave, they take your sense of self with them. So let's be honest. This isn't about love. It's about survival. You're not just afraid of losing the relationship. You're afraid of losing the version of yourself that only feels real when you're with them. And that's what makes detachment feel so brutal. Because it's not just about letting go of the person. It's about letting go of the you that only exists when they're looking. But it goes deeper than behavior. It reaches into your identity, into the version of you you leave behind just to be loved. And until you reclaim that version, you'll keep chasing relationships where the price of connection is the sacrifice of your truth. You become an edited version of yourself, afraid of being too much, afraid of being not enough. So you begin to trim your edges. You silence your opinions. You dim your light just enough so it doesn't outshine theirs. And at first, It feels like strategy, like compromise, like love. But slowly, subtly, you begin to disappear. This isn't just behavior, it's identity erosion. Because when love becomes conditional, when your worth feels tied to their comfort, you don't grow. You fragment. You split off pieces of yourself, burying the parts you think they won't love. And what you keep visible isn't you. It's the version you hope they'll accept. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the parts of ourselves we repress, deny, or disown, because they don't fit the image we think is lovable. The shadow isn't evil. It's unintegrated. It holds your anger, your grief, your sexuality, your power, your honesty. And when those parts are exiled, they don't disappear. They operate from the dark, unconsciously, indirectly, through sabotage, shame, and suppression. You don't just lose yourself. You rehearse your emotions until truth feels like a threat. And your soul? It gets edited into someone else's comfort zone. The tragedy? You wear a mask so long, you forget there's a face beneath it. And what began as a survival instinct turns into a permanent costume. You confuse being accepted with being authentic. You believe closeness requires curation, editing, control. But here's the truth. Any connection that requires you to filter your soul is not connection, it's performance. And no matter how much praise the mask gets, your inner self withers in silence because it knows this isn't me. And every time you abandon your truth just to avoid abandonment from another, you deepen the wound you were hoping love would heal. It's a paradox. The very thing you do to stay loved is the reason you feel unloved. Because if they only love the mask, then who's really being loved? Certainly not you. And here's what most don't realize. The more you suppress your truth, the more resentment brews beneath the surface. It shows up in passive aggression, in emotional shutdowns, in sudden outbursts, in disconnection that feels like mystery, but is actually self-abandonment made manifest. You may be physically present in the relationship, but psychologically, you've left the building. And this happens silently, systematically, until one day you wake up and ask, who have I become? Here's the answer. You've become the version of you that was shaped by survival, not by authenticity. A person who learned to shrink to stay safe, to please, to stay chosen, to edit themselves, to avoid being alone. And while the world may reward that mask, while your partner may praise your compliance, your sweetness, your ease, it's not love if it costs your truth. And while the mask may keep you loved, it costs you something far more sacred, your truth. So, let me ask you something difficult. If you had to choose between being fully loved for a version of you that's not real, or being truly seen, even if it means standing alone, what would you choose? Because that choice doesn't reveal your love. It reveals your self-worth. Letting go isn't the end of love. It's the beginning of self-love. We've been told that real love holds on no matter what. That to let go is to give up. To walk away is to fail. But the truth? There are moments when the most loving act is not to fight for the bond, but to fight for your own center. Because there's a difference between letting go of someone and letting go of yourself in order to keep them. Stoic philosopher Epictetus said, "There is only one way to happiness, to cease worrying about things beyond our control." And attachment, unhealthy attachment, is the ultimate illusion of control. You cling, you hold on, you negotiate your value for scraps of attention, for glimpses of warmth. But let's be clear, detachment isn't indifference. It's not emotional shutdown. It's not bitterness masked as strength. Detachment is clarity. It's knowing where you end and another begins. It's choosing to protect your inner space from becoming collateral damage in someone else's chaos. And that choice is not cold, it's sacred. Because here's the paradox most people never understand. Real love requires space. Possession destroys what connection was meant to protect. When you grasp too tightly, you don't hold someone close. You suffocate them. And in the process, you lose yourself too. We confuse devotion with endurance. We think love is proven by how long we tolerate being broken. But self-betrayal isn't a love language, and longevity isn't proof of alignment. To detach is to tell yourself the truth, even when it hurts. To say, I can love you and still choose me. That's not weakness. That's self-respect. It's emotional maturity. It's no longer needing chaos to feel alive, no longer mistaking anxiety for passion, no longer confusing sacrifice with sincerity. Detachment means you're willing to let go of the fantasy in order to reclaim your reality. It means no longer holding someone hostage in the prison of your expectations, no longer needing to be chosen to feel complete. You stop negotiating for attention because you've remembered you were whole all along. And yes, it will hurt at first because your nervous system has been wired to associate presence with peace, even when that presence was inconsistent, confusing, or toxic. So when you walk away, your body may panic, your mind may scream, go back, fix it, beg, bend, try again. But that's not intuition, that's withdrawal. That's your trauma, losing its favorite distraction. Letting go means choosing discomfort now over destruction later. And that requires courage, because love doesn't always end with a bang. Sometimes it ends with a slow, quiet awakening. This is not love. This is fear wearing perfume. This is me forgetting myself to remember you. But once you let go, something unexpected happens. The pain makes space for clarity. You begin to breathe differently. You begin to see yourself again, not as a fragment of someone else's story, but as the author of your own. You stop reacting. You start responding. You no longer beg for peace. You become it. Because when you truly detach, you don't close your heart. You just stop offering it to those who don't know how to hold it. And that isn't the end of love. It's where real love begins. You start to confuse chaos with connection. You start to believe that the more it hurts, the more it must be real. And before you know it, you're addicted, not to the person, but to the highs and the devastating lows. This isn't love. This is a chemical loop. It's dopamine meets adrenaline. It's your nervous system conditioned to crave emotional roller coasters just to feel alive. In psychology, we call this intermittent reinforcement. When affection, validation, or attention is given inconsistently, unpredictably. You don't know when it's coming, but when it does, it floods you with relief, with hope, with longing. And that unpredictability is what makes it addictive. The same mechanism behind slot machines is behind toxic love. You never know when the next I love you will come, when the next text will land, when the next moment of sweetness will break the silence. And so, you wait, you chase, you guess, you hope, and every now and then, they reward your hope, just enough to keep you in the game. But here's the cost. Your emotional baseline becomes chaos. Calm starts to feel boring. Peace starts to feel like absence. And this is the tragedy. You meet someone kind, consistent, honest, and your body says, I'm not attracted. Because deep down, you've mistaken intensity for intimacy. You've learned to equate love with nervous system activation. And without the chase, the withdrawal, the push-pull dynamic, you feel nothing. But that nothing is actually stability. It's what your nervous system has been begging for, but can no longer recognize. Why? Because emotional dysregulation has become your norm. You've normalized red flags. You crave the peak and survive the crash. And worst of all, you romanticize it. You call it passion. You call it chemistry. You call it love, worth fighting for. But what you're really doing is reenacting a wound. You're repeating a cycle that keeps you small, insecure, reactive, because the silence of healthy love feels louder than the chaos you're used to. Here's the uncomfortable truth. When you say, "I don't like calm love," what you're really saying is, "I don't know how to be with someone who doesn't hurt me like I hurt myself." Because real love won't entertain your inner war. It won't play games. It won't manipulate, abandon, or confuse you. It will feel simple, safe, even soft. But if you've been wired to believe love should feel like survival, then softness can feel unbearable. That's why many people reject the very thing they claim they want. They're not afraid of being hurt again. They're afraid of being seen in a space where pain is no longer the currency, where they can't earn love through suffering, because now they'd have to receive it without bleeding first. But if chaos is your comfort zone, it means the real wound still hasn't been touched. Because until you heal the pattern that equates pain with passion, you will continue to reject peace. You will continue to walk away from people who love you gently and run toward those who awaken your trauma. This isn't your fault, but it is your work. Your nervous system can be rewired. Your attachment can be healed, but only when you stop confusing emotional chaos with emotional depth. Love, real love, is not adrenaline. It's resonance. It doesn't spike and crash. It expands. And it's not found in the drama. It's found in the stillness that used to scare you. The adult who suffers for love is often the child who never felt enough, not because love was never offered, but because it came with conditions. Be good. Don't cry. Don't be difficult. Don't ask for too much. Make everyone proud. And so, you learned to trade authenticity for approval, to earn love by suppressing need. And from that moment on, a quiet belief formed inside you. To be loved, I must abandon something real in me. That belief never left. It just changed form. It showed up in your relationships, in your patterns, in your fears of being too much or not enough. And that's the core of emotional dependency. It's not just about the other. It's about a wound that predates them entirely. Carl Jung called this the wounded inner child, the part of you frozen in time, still waiting for the love, safety, and validation you didn't receive when you needed it most. But in modern therapy, we go deeper. Internal family systems, IFS, teaches us that you're not just one self. You're made up of many parts, sub-personalities that carry emotions, memories, and strategies for survival. There's a part of you that clings, a part that panics, a part that people pleases, a part that pushes others away before they can leave you first. These parts aren't broken. They're protective. They were formed to shield the wounded child inside you, the one who still believes that being abandoned means being unworthy. But here's what no one told you. You don't need to destroy these parts. You need to lead them. And you do that by becoming the adult your inner child never had. This is called emotional reparenting, a process of learning to self-soothe, self-validate, and self-protect with tenderness, consistency, and truth. You no longer wait for someone else to give you what was missing. You stop outsourcing love, and you start providing it. You learn how to sit with your sadness without shaming it, to hold your fear without obeying it, to affirm your needs without apologizing for them. And little by little, you rebuild the trust between the parts of you that felt unloved and the parts of you that tried to survive without love. This is not quick. It is not easy, but it is sacred. Because once you see that child within you, once you recognize their voice, beneath every emotional spiral, every relationship panic, every moment of desperation, you begin to notice it was never about them. But once you see that child within you, you stop blaming the other and start healing yourself. Because no partner can love you enough to silence a child you refuse to acknowledge. And no rejection from the outside can hurt you as deeply as the abandonment you've continued on the inside. Here's the good news. You can stop the cycle. You can build a new relationship with yourself. One where boundaries are no longer walls, where calm is no longer boring, where being alone feels like home. That's the gift of inner healing. It doesn't promise that you'll never feel pain again. It promises that you'll never abandon yourself because of that pain. And when that shift happens, when the child inside you feels seen, safe, and loved, you stop choosing partners who mimic your wound. You stop loving from lack. You start loving from alignment. You stop chasing rescue. You start building resonance. Because now, you are the safe place. You stop seeking someone to complete you, and you start sharing from wholeness, not from desperation, not from scarcity, not from the fear of being alone. You stop loving to survive. You start loving to build, because something inside you has shifted. You're no longer chasing a missing piece. You're offering a full presence. This is the core of Carl Jung's idea of individuation, the process of becoming whole within yourself. Not perfect, not fixed, but integrated. It means meeting all your parts, the joyful, the jealous, the wounded, the wise, and bringing them into harmony. It means confronting your shadow, making peace with your inner child, and reclaiming the self you abandoned to be accepted. Individuation is not a destination. It's a return to what you always were, beneath the masks. And from that place, love changes. It no longer becomes an exchange. It becomes an expression. You no longer enter relationships thinking, "What can I get?" You enter asking, "What can we create together?" And that is an entirely different level of intimacy. Old love is based on transaction, on control, on keeping score, on trying to earn security by managing how the other sees you. New love is based on freedom, on choice, on authenticity, on the willingness to be fully known, even in your imperfection, and still remain whole. Because when you've individuated, you no longer collapse into the other. You stand beside them as two centers, two conscious beings, two souls, meeting in resonance, not rescue. And that kind of love, it doesn't demand, it doesn't cling, it doesn't manipulate, it offers, it invites, it flows. Because now you know, love is not fusion, it's freedom with proximity. You can be fully with someone without becoming them. And this is the paradox of healing. The more whole you become alone, the more deeply you can connect with someone else, because you no longer need them to hold your worth. You're already holding it. You no longer need them to soothe your fear. You've learned how to self-regulate. You no longer need them to save you. You're not drowning anymore. That's when love becomes sacred. Not because it completes you, but because it reflects you. You begin to love with presence, not performance. With boundaries, not barriers. with truth, not tactics. And when conflict comes, because it always does, you don't collapse. You don't play the victim. You don't punish with silence or withdrawal. You stay grounded. You speak clearly. You repair consciously. Because you're not trying to win the argument. You're trying to protect the connection. And when you're no longer split inside, you no longer split your relationships either. You no longer attract chaos. You no longer crave the high of being needed, because you're already enough. You no longer tolerate being dimmed, because you've stopped fearing your own light. This is the new script. It's slower, quieter, more honest, less dramatique. But it's real. It's a love that doesn't bind you. It builds you. It doesn't consume your identity. It honors it. And if you've never experienced that kind of love before, don't panic, because you're not behind. You're just arriving into the version of you that no longer performs to be loved, but loves. If you've reached this point, it means something in you is already changing. This wasn't just a video. This was a ritual, a mirror, a moment of quiet recognition that maybe, just maybe, you've been calling fear love your entire life. That's not your fault. But now, it's your responsibility. Because the truth has a strange power. Once it's been seen, it cannot be unseen. The old story, that you need someone to complete you, to save you, to validate your worth, has been crumbling quietly for years. And now, it's time to let it fall. Because the love of your life was never another person. It was your path back to yourself. It was the moment you stopped begging for love and started becoming it. It was the moment you realized that solitude isn't punishment. It's the birthplace of power. And here's what I want you to understand now. You were never broken. You were fragmented, edited, conditioned to forget that you were whole all along. And love, real love, doesn't cost your peace. It doesn't require you to shrink, contort, or bleed for belonging. Real love is clean, direct, steady. It doesn't come to rescue you. It walks with you. It doesn't silence your voice. It helps you hear it more clearly. And here's the uncomfortable beauty. Most people won't be ready for that kind of love, because most people still love through their wounds. But you don't need to wait for anyone else to heal before you choose your own clarity. So here's your invitation. Let this be your line in the sand. The moment where everything changes, not because the world suddenly treats you better, but because you treat yourself differently. You show up for yourself, not from fear, but from truth. You speak your needs without apologizing. You walk away from what costs your soul. You stop negotiating your worth for temporary comfort. And when the old patterns come back, as they always do, you'll recognize them, not as fate, but as echoes. And you'll choose peace anyway, because now you know, and you can never unknow. So if this resonated, if it touched a part of you that's been waiting in silence for years, then don't just watch and forget. Anchor this moment. Mark it. Claim it. Go to the comments and write, "I choose my peace over fear." Write it for you, so you can come back to it on the days you forget. So it becomes a commitment, not just to be loved, but to love yourself well. And if you haven't yet, subscribe, not for content, but for continuation, because this space isn't here to entertain you. It's here to break illusions and build the self beneath them. This is your turning point. You don't need to earn love anymore. You don't need to chase it. You are it. And from this moment forward, you will never again confuse attachment with love, because now you know, now you see. And once you see, you can never unsee. We'll meet again, not just in the next video, but in the version of you that is finally coming home to peace, to presence, to power, to you.